Hello folks, this is Mr. O'Brien, and welcome to the hopefully quick video quiz comparing and contrasting Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, two late 19th century, early 20th century advocates of African American equality, although it should be noted that Booker T. Washington is a little bit before W.E.B. Du Bois. So let's get started. Alright, some background on Booker T. He was born in 1856 in Virginia as a slave, so obviously he was not a slave for all that long, since slavery ends in 1865, so 9 years, which I'm sure as you're going through it feels like a very long time. Nevertheless, it's important to remember he was born in the South as a slave, and once slavery was over, he was living under the heavy boot of Jim Crow and lynchings, and that informs his beliefs about how African Americans should strive for equality. Alright, he eventually establishes the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, kind of this vocational training institute for African Americans. Alright, he believed that education, more specifically vocational education, was important for African Americans. Alright, learning a specific skill, a trade, a way to work with your hands, more of a blue-collar type employment. Alright, and his method for achieving equality was most publicly articulated in the famous Atlanta Compromise speech of 1895, in which he encouraged African Americans to adjust or accept segregation and abandon their push for civil rights. In other words, he advocated vocational training, uplifting themselves socioeconomically, and eventually 10, 20, 30, 40, how many years down the road, white folk will have no choice but to accept their equality. So again, he urged them to accept segregation in exchange for economic opportunities. It was kind of like a self-help thing. The famous metaphor from that speech, the Atlanta Compromise speech, was cast down your bucket. Okay, take your bucket, don't ask for someone to fill it with water, just reach down and pick up the water yourself. Alright, a famous quote from that speech: "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress." So he did not try to push for equality at that immediate moment, alright, and he was not all that active in political affairs. That being said, as you could imagine why, he was the preferred African American in the eyes of white people. Alright, so some background on W.E.B. Du Bois. He was born in 1868 in Massachusetts. He received a doctorate from Harvard, and he opposed Booker T's accommodation policies. Accommodationist would be the term for someone like Booker T. Washington, because he was accommodating. He allowed white people to keep their racist beliefs. Think about it. I mean, the belief system of the day was it was moving away from scientific racism of inherent permanent inferiority of non-Anglo-Saxons, non-whites, and was moving towards a more, you will be civilized, but you're not there yet. You need some more time to cook in the oven, so to speak. And Booker T's beliefs kind of, dovetailed with that. It jibed with that. So it allowed white people, it agreed with the predominant or the growing sentiment among white people that non-white people were not civilized yet. Once you get there, you will be part of, quote, the people, but not yet. W.E.B. Du Bois would not accept that. To him, that was accepting second-class citizenship. All right. So he begins the Niagara Movement in 1905, in which he called for immediate economic and educational equality. All right, up in Niagara Falls, Canada. He declared this. He wanted an immediate end to discrimination and segregation, and this helped morph into the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that was founded by Du Bois and other white progressives. Now, to be sure, as the years went on, Du Bois actually had to quit that group because he could not deal with the racist, the racial beliefs among white progressives. That being said, Booker T also advocated for intellectual education instead of vocational education, and he believed in what was called the talented 10th. the top 10% of intellectual African Americans that would uplift the rest of the African American population. And the critique of W.E.B. Du Bois would be that it was somewhat elitist. But his argument against Booker T, besides being an accommodationist, was you're accepting segregation, you're accepting second-class citizenship, and we won't be able to uplift ourselves without these equal rights. So your long-term plan won't be able to happen. That was his basic argument. All right, so the goal of the NAACP was to ensure equality and end discrimination. And as you get to the early civil rights movement, the NAACP is who is winning the victories in the 1930s and 40s in the courts. All right, they're the guys, for example, that sued, that eventually becomes Brown v. Board of Education. All right, and there's his talented 10th. Leaders in the African American community should have full access to education and American life, Du Bois argued. All right, so comparing the two, both wanted rights for African Americans. They were two of the most influential African Americans from the late 19th, early 20th century. In fact, Du Bois was born during Reconstruction in the 1870s, and he died a few days before Martin Luther King and the Million Man March on Washington, D.C. in the 1960s. But they both differed on how to achieve those rights. W.E.B. Du Bois was against accommodation and segregation. Booker T was more for accepting it and gradual acceptance of African Americans as equals in the eyes of white people, whereas Du Bois was for immediate acceptance. He wanted it here and now. All right, so some test tips, some essay topics that might pop up about these two folks, maybe comparing leaders from the time. An example, how did Booker T and W.E.B. compare to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, two folks that you will learn about in US 2. Tips for multiple choice questions. For Booker T, know that he favored vocational training with your hands. Be able to identify that famous quote and the cast on your bucket metaphor. For W.E.B. Du Bois, know about the NAACP, the Niagara Movement, and the talented 10th. All right, good luck. And be sure to do the quiz that will pop up right now.